Welcome to FOBtv, the future of business. I'm your host, Kevin Benedict, and I want to welcome each of you to our program today. Now, this program is part of a series which I'm very excited about. We did a virtual event. The event was called Reimagining Higher Education and the University of the Future. We brought in 4 panelists to share their insights with us. Those panelists represent 3 different countries, 3 different universities, plus the giant educational publishing company, Wiley. Where do you see a technology gap between where universities are today and where they're going to have to be 5 years out, maybe even 10 years out? What still needs to be, delivered to fill that technology gap?
Well, I think that comes in a couple of areas, Kevin. Many universities, especially within the UK sector, are still facing those challenges regarding legacy investments, legacy systems, legacy infrastructure, and the way that they have been knitted together over the previous years. I think that's a challenge that shouldn't be underestimated. So when we talk about what are the technology gaps, there's almost a technology deficit that still exists in some areas of UK higher education. And that has to be navigated and overcome before you can even start looking forward. With that, the obvious directions around cloud, software as a service, infrastructure as a service are evident. But again, not all of UK higher education is in that space. So there is some catch up to be done. If we want to start thinking about future technologies, and it goes back to that place around being able to digest learning content in a way that is the most appropriate and convenient for our students, we have to think about what those channels are. Where can people learn? How can we provide those platforms? Electronically, digitally, device agnostically, and increasingly so in an inclusive, accessible format, recognizing our students come in many different shapes, sizes, diversities. So that is a key focus for us. But then if we want to start thinking about even further, the world is a big place, and particularly at Oxford, we would like to ensure that Oxford is more accessible to more students in more geographies than ever before. So things like virtual learning, things like holographic projection, to be able to take Oxford out to the world are things that could be particularly exciting, especially when you were saying in terms of the previous questions, higher education and learning is becoming an increasingly competitive market. We are seeing new entrants all the time from new sectors. And we're not complacent with that in Oxford. We know it's a threat that exists. We know that students have more choice and have more selection than ever before. So we need to make sure that we are providing the right student experience and that can be seen and that is tangible to ensure that we continue to be competitive and providing the best student offer that we can.
So I think some of the gaps are in the facilities that we have. We started very rapidly to try and fill in some of those gaps once the pandemic hit. We've been adding things like simulcasting into our traditional lecture rooms that will allow us to actually teach courses globally, not just locally, so that students can be both here and elsewhere simultaneously in the same class, right? And so I expect that we will see more and more of our classrooms with this type of simulcast capability. But I also think that we need to improve educational technology. Educational technology still feels, in many cases, a little clunky compared to the kinds of technology that have enormous investment going into them in other realms of our lives. I have sometimes said, I feel like when I'm teaching my class, it's like teaching through a drinking straw. There is a lack of sense of presence, even when we are teaching on Zoom or Teams or Collaborate or one of the many platforms that we now have available to us. There is a lack of immediacy to it. And immediacy is an educational term that means that ability to kind of read the room and read how your students are engaging with you in a classroom. And the technologies as they currently exist have sort of artificially tried to build in immediacy, but we're not quite there yet. And so I think there's a long way we can go from where we are to the kind of technology, systems, infrastructure that will allow us to do this very effectively with students in class and outside of the campus together in learning environments.
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's clear we got the networking down well enough to support Zoom and video conferencing, which has been a great leap forward. I mean, if you just think back 10 years ago, if we'd had a pandemic, we wouldn't have been able to do exactly this kind of meeting that we're having now worldwide. But it's still so far off from that really engaging experience. For example, one thing that still doesn't work well is a mixed mode thing where you have some students in person and some students remote. You inevitably end up forgetting the remote ones or whatever. It's just not immersive enough. They're not there present in the sort of virtual space that you want. So that's one challenge. I think another one is we all miss the personal interactions. When you're filing into the classroom together and you're talking, or after the class, you come up to the professor to ask them a question because you didn't understand something. And we're missing those lightweight, light touch engagements. And so user interfaces and ways of rethinking a virtual classroom or conference or whatever are going to have to be developed, especially over the next 5 years, if we're going to have meaningful, deep engagement around remote telepresence in the classroom.
Universities have historically invested quite a bit in technology infrastructure, particularly with the traditional learning management systems, and those are still pervasive and widely used. I would say, based on my experience in working with universities for a long time now, probably 15 to 20% of the LMS's capabilities are truly leveraged by most faculty. Now that is changing with COVID and with having to deliver more courses online. I think universities are making better use of the technology investments that they already have. But there are issues both in terms of what technology is needed to deliver more personalized, more flexible learning experiences for students in college. It's really important for us to consider equity and access for students who are coming to college. So that's been one of the most heartbreaking side effects of COVID, in my opinion. When universities had to rapidly, and colleges had to rapidly migrate all of the instruction online, what became really apparent was there was great disparity among college students in terms of Wi-Fi access, in terms of solid webcams, solid computers, quiet study spaces, so that students who had greater, financial struggles, maybe were in a, particularly underserved population, really had a tough time making that transition. So I think in terms of technology for a higher education institution, we need to think about all students and make sure that all students are being considered equally, not just students who have the means and the funding to be able to afford the technology to learn online. International students and learners don't have solid internet access. So we need to be able to provide, for example, offline access to materials or low tech access to materials so that they can still learn without requiring significant broadband or Wi-Fi access. So I think that's a really common and huge problem that we collectively have to solve for. The other thing is that there's a bit of a myth. We often call faculty digital immigrants and students digital natives because students are so facile with different technologies and they're on social media all the time. What we have found from our lens in working with instructors and students is that students are very competent when it comes to using the technologies they know well and that they use for social purposes, for engagement, and for their high school experience. Then asking students to become digitally adept in using tools that might be new to them, that's a whole different story. So a student who's really good at Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, or I'm dating myself, let's say Snapchat, is actually may not be that capable in working with Excel or Power BI or Tableau. which might be the tools they need to actually succeed in college. So universities and content providers and course providers need to be able to help students learn the skills they need to succeed academically, not just make the assumptions that they can master those or have those skills coming into school, because they just don't. They don't. And they often need that kind of help and remediation to become digitally adept across the board. I think what we're also seeing in terms of technology gaps and overall gaps that universities can provide and corporations can help them provide is that students are very anxious about developing career-ready skills and developing the tools they need to succeed in their careers. Let's face it, a higher education degree or a set of certificates is expensive. So what we hear consistently from students is they need to understand the return on investment for that investment. Now, there's a whole set of arguments around the commoditization of higher education. And is the value of a degree just getting a great job? No, that's not true. You learn a ton of different skills in getting that degree, and those skills are invaluable, and you can translate those into the workforce. But students are asking for consistent integration, education and instruction to help them develop the skills they need for the workforce. That can include things like, again, like digital tools, the ability to use digital tools and skills like Python or Excel or Tableau. It also, interestingly, is asking instructors and universities to deliver more project-based or experiential learning. It's very hard to do in an online environment. So the other area that I think we'll see greater investment and innovation is around online and digital project-based and experiential learning tools, like virtual simulations, different ways to engage students in class and with each other that go beyond kind of those traditional discussion boards or other kinds of social collaboration tools. One of the things I think we all holistically need to do is work with associations and nonprofits to really ensure that we're delivering that equitable access to education, especially when it relates to technology. So Wiley partnered with a great organization, Digital Us, and Digital Us is really focused on helping learners develop both the technical skills and the access to technology to succeed. So they're working very closely with nonprofits, with higher ed institutions, with organizations that serve underserved populations to try to bridge that divide, to try to close the gap on the technology front. So I think we are committed to being an active member in those projects and those solutions, both here in North America and frankly globally, where the issues around access and equity are even more pressing and more challenging.